Hello. It's a quiet, rainy morning in London, and recently I went for a walk around the city and went to some bookshops and picked up some books. And it's really starting to feel autumnal here in the UK. It's getting really chilly out. I think I need to get my wool hat out soon. But I want to talk about some of these new books that I got and some other books that publishers kindly sent me. And these are all titles which have just been published in October here in the UK. So very, very new and a lot that I'm really interested in. But I would love to know if you have read any of these books or if you're interested in reading any of them now. Now, the first book I want to talk about, I want to talk about a group of newly translated literature, but the first one I'm extremely excited about is The Lack of Light by Nino Haratischwili. And this is translated by Charlotte Collins and Ruth Martin, who also co-translated her previous novel, The Eighth Life, which is a book that I absolutely loved. And I interviewed both the author and her translators here on my channel about that. We had a really fun chat about this book. And so this new novel is, again, takes place in the country of Georgia and follows four women who come of age together in the 1980s. And they are very, very different from each other, but they form this very special bond with each other. And it explores how that friendship is tested throughout a tumultuous period in the 1990s when there are lots of changes in the country. And the author describes how the country of Georgia is kind of like a character in itself in this novel. And this is another very long novel. It's over 700 pages long, and it's published in this interesting way that I've not come across before, where it has this kind of fold over the pages at the end, I think kind of to protect them. And so really beautiful cover to this, and an epic story that I'm really eager to dive into. An Infinite Sadness by Antonio Xerxenesky, who is a Brazilian author, and this is translated by Daniel Hahn. And even though this is a Brazilian author, this story takes place in the Swiss Alps after World War II, and follows a man who works at a sanitarium that is helping to rehabilitate people who have been traumatized throughout World War II. But as the story goes on and it shows his interactions with a number of these characters, it shows how he has his own melancholia, which is plaguing him. And he is of Jewish descent, something that he was able to hide throughout World War II, and it explores his story and the people in this period of time. Interestingly, also the author is a translator himself. He's translated both English and Spanish authors into Portuguese, including George Orwell and Fernanda Melchor. Eye of the Monkey by Krisztina Toth, who is a Hungarian author, and this is translated by Ottilie Mulzet. And this story follows a unnamed European country that has been devastated by a civil war, and how after this civil war, an autocracy leads the government and segments the population into different sort of ghettos, and then the privileged level of the population, they are very heavily monitored. And it follows a woman who is a history professor and who is plagued with a lot of trauma, and about how she uncovers and untangles the troubled past of her family and her country. The critic Merv Emery writes of this book that it's a terrifying novel that reminds us how autocracy's brutality and stupidity destroy all that is good in life. Eye of the Monkey is unsparing, unforgettable. I read it with my heart in my throat. Every Time We Say Goodbye by Ivana Sajko, who's a Croatian author, and this is translated by Mima Simic. And this is the story of an individual who is traveling on train from the European coast to Berlin to try to restart his life. And as he is making this train ride, he is meditating on his tumultuous personal history, but also the troubled recent history in Europe and looking at large-scale changes and political tumult. And the author, Clemens Mayer, who has been listed multiple times for the International Booker Prize, says that Ivana Sajko's language is distilled to perfection. It flows and is poetic and hits every nerve, blazingly relevant writing. Next is a new edition of an older novel, a Japanese classic called The Samurai Detectives by Shotaro Ikenami, and it's translated by Yui Kajita. And this was first published in 1973. It's a historical fiction, but it's also described as kind of Sherlock Holmes meets Shogun. And it follows a samurai trainer who is made an offer, a very dubious offer, and this leads to uncovering a large-scale conspiracy. And so it follows this very thrilling story, which is also a murder mystery. Then I have a new novel that I've been hearing a lot of readers talk about, which is Heart the Lover by Lily King, who's an author that I've not read before. I think she's quite prominent in America, but not so much in the UK. And she has fans and authors like Madeline Miller and Elizabeth Stroud and Anne Patchett. And this story follows a woman who's a successful writer, and she has an established family, but she has a complicated romantic past, which she is still working through, of a period in college when she formed a very close connection to two individuals in their academic rigor. And so it's following this kind of untangling of the romance of this story. Then I have some collections of short stories, and for some reason I always really enjoy reading short stories kind of going into the winter period. I guess it's kind of staying inside and like first thing in the morning of reading a short story when I get up and have some tea, or reading a short story aloud to my husband. So first there is a new collection of Flannery O'Connor's short stories to celebrate her centenary, and I've been meaning to read O'Connor's stories all year because of this. But this was edited and comes with an introduction by Lauren Groff, who calls Flannery O'Connor one of the most American of writers because of the way that her fiction explores racial and religious tensions within the country through these very odd individuals. So she portrays the lives of a number of very conflicted characters, and this includes some of her most well-known short stories, like A Good Man is Hard to Find and A Last Encounter with the Enemy, along with some other stories. The Woman Dies by Aoko Matsuda, and this is translated by Polly Barton, and this is a collection of short stories that is exploring the sexism which still pervades a lot of Japanese society throughout a number of different, quite short stories. Some of these short stories are only 1 or 2 pages long, and I think it's always really interesting what an author can condense down into such concentrated fiction. You Glow in the Dark by Liliana Colanzi, who is a Bolivian author, and this is translated by Chris Andrews. And I've read the very first story in this collection called The Cave, where the cave is kind of the central character of this story, this location, and you witness the transformations that occur and people that enter into this cave over a long period of time, from ancient times to more modern times, and then into the future. So it's kind of witnessing the evolution of the world through this single location, where things don't change very much over time, but the people that enter into it in the outside world do. So it's such a interesting, different way of looking at the world. And these stories, I think, are quite creepy, and a lot of them explore kind of dystopian landscapes. Another new collection looking very much to the future is Creative Futures, a collection with a number of different science fiction authors that is edited together by Alan Stroud, who indeed has a number of short stories in this collection. And these are all fictions that imagine the challenges which we might be facing over the next century and into the future, and imagining how these different challenges might play out in different contexts. This has a really beautiful cover as well that's kind of metallic, and these end papers that are swirly. There's also a new paperback edition of Jonathan Coe's most recent novel, The Proof of My Innocence, and I've been meaning to read this book ever since it came out a year ago, and I'm glad it's in this new paperback edition, because this story follows a post-university student who is an aspiring writer and then gets tangled in this strange case, a kind of murder mystery case and a political conspiracy. And so it's, part thriller, part murder mystery. And I saw Jonathan Coe talk about this book recently at the Edinburgh Book Festival. And he spoke about it so engagingly that, I'm really keen to get to it. And I think it'll be a great autumnal read. There's a new edition of 2 essays by Milan Kundera called 89 Words Followed by Prague, a Disappearing Poem. And these were first published in 1985 and 1986. And one looks at Milan Kundera's life as an exile and as a writer. And the other looks at his country of the Czech Republic itself and the political conflicts within his country and the kind of tensions between Western influence and the Soviet Union. And finally, there is the book Every Last Fish, What Fish Do for Us and What We Do to Them by Rose George, who is said to be a very entertaining nonfiction writer. So obviously this is an advanced copy of the book, and this is what the final cover looks like. And this is looking at our relationship to fish as food and looking at the fishing industry and how that industry and our relationship to fish as food might change going into the future. Now, personally, as someone who doesn't eat any fish or seafood, I have a very different stake in this than I know some other readers will have. But I know it's very important. I'm looking at the ecology of fish and how that relates to changes in the environment going forward. So those are all of the books, new books that I'm keen on hoping to read many of them soon and over the autumnal period. But like I said, I would love to hear if you have read any of these books and what you think about them, if you would recommend them to me, or if you're interested in reading any of them now, or if there are any other new books that you got recently that you're really keen on getting to. I would love to hear about that. But I hope you have a lovely day, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.